So I'm super glad to be joined by Rohn Malhotra. I don't know if my pronunciation is on point. You can maybe correct it if you want. I think many of you may already know him because he is a podcast host himself, and I was happy to be a guest on your SportsTech All-Star podcast before. And the name of your podcast is actually the topic I would be happy to dive into a bit today, the state of the sports tech field and the big themes you are seeing and how you look at this field. I mean, here over the last episodes, we kept it very Web3 centric, even aside from the sports market. But of course, that is a very important market for us. And so happy to be joined by you. But before we get into things, probably you want to give a quick introduction of yourself to the part of our audience that may not yet know you and what you're doing with your podcast, with SportsTechX, and so on.
Sure, happy to. Hey, Thomas. Hey, Ron. Thanks for having me. Pronunciation was okay. Not too bad. Rohn. For anybody else who cares, it rhymes with stone, which is maybe something we might like to do. But that's a whole other conversation. What we do at SportsTechX is, we talk about what's happening in sports tech. We're essentially market research or a market intelligence company. And my job and our team's job is to keep an eye on what are the latest trends in the world of sports tech, what's happening in different parts of the world. So we look at it purely from a startup investment perspective. So everything from like bottom up, and also looking at what's happening at the elite pro level, what the sports teams are doing. But essentially, we track who's investing in what, like how much funding is going into startups in the US versus Asia versus Europe, etc. Which startups are raising money, which investors are putting in the money. And then through that data, we extrapolate trends and we see what's happening across the world. And then connect back to what you might see in the news. Classic example, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is NFTs. So all this big craze that you see about people rushing, like some sort of gold rush, which has already run out. I don't know, depending on who you believe, or what's happening. So we look at how many startups there are, who the players are, what the teams are doing. So trying to connect the whole ecosystem and do that for the entire world that we call sports tech.
And how did you get into this? Do you have a background more on the sports side, on the investment side, on the tech side?
Now, my background is as an entrepreneur. So I started my first startup, in 2009. I started my career in consulting. I was with KPMG. Mm-hmm. This is back in India, in Bangalore. Did a nice 3-year stint with them, had a great time. So actually, funnily, I was like a couple of projects that I worked on were around reports and creating like thought leadership, because that's what, consulting companies do. It's part of the functions that they do. So I got a taste of it and I got a sense of how to structure things. Then went and ran a startup for 8 years in a completely unconnected industry, which was actually apparel, textile. We were doing like a DIY, make your own t-shirt kind of company called Alma Mater in India.
All right.
Yeah, it was pretty successful. We ran something. And after I exited that company, I was looking to make my next move. And sports just seemed like the right fit. Sports tech was an emerging space in 2016, 17. Found the topic, loved it, dived right in, met Ben, who's my co-founder. And we gave SportsTechX a crack.
Cool. That's a cool story. And so you do these reports, and I think everybody who is in the sports tech industry is aware of your reports. But I'd still be curious, what are like the big topics you currently see, maybe even with an outlook to your upcoming reports, even though the last ones just dropped recently. I think one topic you mentioned already is NFTs. We are quite aware of this. But besides this, which themes are you seeing and why are they so relevant?
Dive right in. Go to the trends. Maybe we can park the NFTs conversation because I'm sure that's stuff that you guys cover a lot. But also, I think the conversation is bigger around NFTs, or it's rather Web3 and.
Oh, we will get to it.
We will get to it, I'm sure. The metaverse and all that jazz. But apart from that, there are a couple of ancillary industries. Fantasy sports and betting for example, is a big one, which also, of course, has a strong connection to Web3 applications. But we're seeing this, like, there's, when you talk about sports betting, there's big money, right? And we're seeing a move to legalization of sports betting, which has taken place over the last 2 years, especially in the US. Now, when the biggest sports market in the world takes a topic like sports betting and legalizes it, you can imagine there's tons of money.
Massive waves.
Yeah, exactly. And it has huge implications for the rest of the world. So just over the last, like, I think 2018, New Jersey passed legislation, 2019 came into effect, 2020 onwards, we've started seeing this wave. I think it's 30 states now, it's fully legal, and another like 10 or 12 where it's about to be. I think only 5 or 6 states have decided to stay away from it. So
just to clarify, Rohn, you're talking about the ability for college students or college athletes to monetize their brands.
No. That's name image.
Okay.
That's name image likeness, NIL. That's a completely separate thing. I'm talking about purely sports betting.
Sports betting.
You see an event. Whatever odds you get on it.
DraftKings.
Yeah. And again, so fantasy sports is separate, which is for fake money or play money, and then there's real money sports betting. Yeah, which is typical, see odds, win, lose, draw, etc. And the US is trying to build around prop bets, which is over-unders, basically a spread. I mean, I'm not the right guy to explain these kind of things, but
I think you're talking about things like Underdog, which is like a fantasy football application where you can kind of bet on like the over/under of scores.
Sure.
Kind of like okay.
That's again one part of it, but there's
one type.
Now imagine it becoming much bigger. Now imagine instead of Underdog, which is maybe some obscure website, ESPN, which while you're watching the game is giving you a feed of odds right below the screen, and press the red button to place a bet. And it's becoming like plugged into every home and not just ESPN.
I mean, if you follow US sports and US sports media, like the integrations into like the broadcasts even and written sports media, they've gone down this rabbit hole quite a bit. And I mean, of course, it drives excitement, right? If you have money on the line for a given game, it's just that much more exciting. What about, because you mentioned fantasy sports, of course there is also daily fantasy, which is the hybrid where you play for real money based on outcomes. And one question that we hear often, but I'm by no means an expert, maybe you have a more qualified take. When will this reach European football, also known as soccer, as a big thing? Because in the US it's so big, but here it's like not really. And why is that?
I think it's a cultural thing. I think that's clear. Europe has just kind of treated sports betting or any sort of real money associated betting or fantasy with like a barge pole. You've kept it at an arm's length. So I think it's cultural. It does happen. For example, in Spain especially, there are quite large players which are kind of those seedy, and you see this in Germany as well, or other parts of Europe. These are these tinted kind of rooms which you'll see in city centers, which are like gambling holes, which like slot machines kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Smoky gambling rooms.
All of those things. Like that's how they consider it, because they're dark and shady. It'll be in the city center, but it's got dark tints on the outside, right? It's not bright light and welcoming everybody in. That's how Europe has traditionally seen this. It's happening. UK, it's legal. Sports betting has been legal throughout, but it's kind of like the dirty cousin, the ugly sister, whatever you want to call it, just kept on the side. But that's not the sentiment everywhere else. For context, in India, daily fantasy or fantasy sports has exploded since the company is called Dream 11, which started in 2012. They really hit scale in 2016 and 17. Today, Dream 11 is an $8 billion at their last valuation. There are 140 million users plus. And there is like a nation of cricket fanatics who are jumping on the sport. Brazil in March passed legislation to legalize sports betting. So when you take like these two huge economies, like mass market economies, and they're taking fantasy sports and betting quite seriously. And then you say, okay, US has done this. I mean, you can see the trickle down effect. Like all the innovation that will happen in the US, there'll be players that leverage that and take it to markets like India and maybe China has different formats, but Brazil, esports betting. I mean, it goes on and on. There's a lot happening.
I think, Rohn, one thing that you mentioned is kind of like this shady, dark approach here in Europe. And I think something that the United States tends to do pretty well with these types of things is like they'll take something that's typically like dark, maybe shady, maybe filled with regulation, and then they'll like gamify it. They'll make it where it's like attached to an RPG or like a fantasy game. And I think that's what they're going to do. And that's going to like hit that major market and get those like, those fans who typically used to think that sports betting was such a, I don't know, scandalous type of thing.
Taboo subject.
What do you think?
You're spot on. Until 2 years ago, I think it was 2019, maybe pre-pandemic, 2019, so not 2020. But the NHL was the first league which kind of said, okay, we're going to let some sort of sports betting sponsors in. The NFL kind of held it away. The MLB was on the fence. The NBA were the cool kids. So, and within no time, every league has signed their own deals, exclusive partners. They've embraced it wholly. Athletes are endorsing things themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, they've taken it out of the dark and not brought it to the light, like shone the spotlight and said, hey, this is it. And this is so attractive. You've seen it through the NBA playoffs. Steph Curry is talking about cryptocurrencies and sports betting. Like there's so much going on. So that's a whole other topic.
There's some kind of cognitive dissonance almost, no? Because like football here in Europe has like bring me your money, the B-wins, the typicals of this world. Yeah. So they had no fear whatsoever to take the money, but still the image is the same. And then yeah, just from a user experience perspective, I think like daily fantasy is so much more fun than just like the old school results betting. I mean, you mentioned like there are new ways like prop betting. Then people are super bullish on like 5G powered live betting during the live games, and then you can do all these what do you call these, like these combination bets that you can do where you say parlays, same game parlays and stuff that make it more exciting. But I think daily fantasy is really something that from if I would be a huge soccer fan and reading and studying up, this would maybe be my preferred betting format. But well, let's see when it catches on, if ever, over here in a big way form.
I've been playing fantasy Premier League. So Premier League is the league that we've always followed. Is since we were kids in India. It's the first league that was on TV. We have a fantasy league between me and my college group, my university group, since 2006-07.
Nice.
And every year, I won it last year, and man, that's a huge thing.
Congrats.
I actually spent...
Humble brag.
Oh man, not even humble. You're kidding me? To win it is huge. And it's nothing. There's no money. There's nothing. It's just...
Send this to your league mates. Yeah. Send this clip.
I will. They'll be fuming. And it's no money, no nothing. It's just pure pride. If you think you know the sport you're talking about, show it. Pick the player, get the points, win the thing. And that's what it is. Now you take that pride and add a layer of, hey, I can make money. Yeah, that becomes really powerful.
Yeah. And some people did big time, especially like in the early days, like all these people coming from poker to daily fantasy and so on. I remember some interesting reported stories. So okay, that was like the one big topic that you see. Is there a second major one?
Before I come to the second one, a great story. If anybody knows Brentford FC, which is a Premier League team, which is built and owned now by a guy who made his money of sports betting. It's a great...
Oh, I didn't know this story. That's cool.
It's a great story. And that is a club that is built on... Yeah, everybody talks about Moneyball, and Moneyball is now an early 2000s phrase even. But no, they embrace it and they live it. And because this is a guy who made his money through sports betting, use of analytics, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's at the table.
I want to ask you something. Quick question. I mean, with this whole like Moneyball and like analytics type approach, like... I'm pretty curious in that topic and how analytics is going to come into football specifically, or soccer. I mean, we saw Kevin DeBruyne recently kind of, I think it was either his team or his social media team, and they kind of like pumped up his name and pumped up his reputation by using analytics. And I think they partnered with like an analytics company. Do you know anything about that? Do you know, like, what do you see in this whole realm of like analytics coming into sports?
So KDB is a great example of an athlete taking ownership of their analytics and using it for his own contract negotiations. I'll give you another great example. That was with a company called Analytics FC, if I'm not mistaken. There's another great example which I love. I mean, we know how teams use analytics as part of strategy, as part of transfers, recruitment, etc. But Memphis Depay, this is in 2018, I think, or 19, used a Dutch company called Sports to use analytics to recruit his next team. When he was leaving Manchester United, he hired a bunch of guys to analyze which teams across Europe would be best suited for his style of play. So he reverse engineered the recruitment. That's how he ended up at Lyon. And then from Lyon, he did so well to end up at Barcelona after that, right? So it was a great move for them. So, I mean, these are just some of the ways that analytics is being used.
I'm surprised that's not more like widely used and widely, embedded into these athletes. Crazy.
I think it already is. In fact, now there's a counter conversation. There is a group. I forget the name. I have to look it up. But there is a group of footballers, not Rebel FC. I don't know what they call themselves, but basically it's about 300 professional footballers who's setting up to protest the use of analytics against them in contracts. Because here's what's happening with biometric data, and Europe gives you GDPR protection, right? So how their data, we talked about sports betting and fantasy just now, their data is being used to make money for a lot of other people, which is not for them, number one. So A, maybe they want a piece of that. And part B is, how do I make sure that data, which is my health data, if I'm injured, how my recovery is going, is not being used against me in a contract negotiations or is accessible to other teams, which might be my next team. So analytics is not the future. It's very much here in every way, shape, or form. And now there are movements to, it's a more nuanced conversation it's becoming.
I mean, I'm trying to think of it from the fans' perspective too. I know, like, the Super League was a perfect example or a perfect case study for how not to, I mean, for lack of a better word, Americanize football and Americanize such a grassroots sport. And I'm trying to think about that from a fan's perspective. Like, I would imagine fans wouldn't like that either. If soccer became so much about analytics, I mean, something like VAR getting introduced to football, was met with a lot of skepticism and a lot of actually dissent, and like, I would imagine that if the game became so like Memphis Depay on Lyon, such a fantastic tactical fit, like, is that how football is supposed to be? Are players supposed to fit so seamlessly and tactically in these teams? Like, they're supposed to be kind of this Frankenstein type of thing in sports. At least that's what I've always thought, being a sports fan. Nothing is scripted, nothing's overanalyzed, but it's just interesting to think about it from like a grassroots point of view.
I think I'm probably on the other side of the spectrum, right? Like one thing that made me get super deep down my NBA fandom rabbit hole. You both know that is my main sport I follow. Was like when analytics became really a thing, trying to understand the game this way, but also understanding the limitations of analytics. And there definitely basketball is a great sport, maybe not as great as baseball because that's not really a team sport, but you can still quite well analyze it. And there's been so much development and progress in understanding the game. And what I wonder in football, I would love more, especially reported understanding of the analytics. I don't know, maybe you do if like on the inside in these teams, if they are so much more savvy than what the media uses, for instance, because that is like maybe the case, right? Maybe the teams understand everything super, super well, but just media, sports media for football doesn't use these stats and analytics, except like, yeah, there is expected goals, but what does that even mean? I mean, it's like on a level, to give you one example, I see a lot of use of raw stats, like he played so many games, shot that many goals, and the expected goals was this and that, but you should break it down. In the NBA, you do it often on a per possession basis or per 100 possession basis, or time, like per 36 minutes, which would make sense because then you have comparable data, but that is not what is being used in like where fans read about it. And I wonder,
Thomas,
yeah,
I think that only works on a macro level. If you're trying to like compare the entire NBA and all the players, I think then you could use that. But like, for example, on a micro level, if you're trying to compare like two players and you're trying to say, well, you know, Westbrook, when that season he was averaging a triple double, his team was bad. Like, was he a better player than a Kawhi Leonard or than a LeBron?
No, of course not. I mean,
and that's where it's like.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, but that is that is why I spoke about the limitations of stats, and you need to see these data points in a context. Which, by the way, also the NBA, because it's indoors, they have all arenas have these camera systems that really track it. Now you have much more intelligent stats by now than even 10 years ago, because now you know, what is this shot like a contested shot or is it an uncontested shot, and that is stuff football much harder to analyze for various reasons. But I still wonder if maybe you're right, maybe it will not happen, at least not in the public domain. But what is your take, if you have one? How is it used inside of teams and organizations nowadays?
It's almost like it's a to each their own kind of model. I'll try to keep this quick. I'll use the same example that I gave, the Brentford FC, right? So Brentford FC is a story where the guy, his name is Matthew Benham or something. He took 300K of, or started with, I don't know, whatever, some amount of money, went to 300K, made that 300 million, which is how he bought a football club. And he uses that level of analytics to seep through every element of that club. I remember a conference where the head of analytics of Liverpool, Champions League winning team, etc., the top of English football, and their head of analytics at a conference was talking about, he does not talk to Jurgen Klopp. Right? Jurgen Klopp is not interested in analytics. Like, his data and his team does a lot of work. They pass on that data to coaches, and he is not allowed to talk to players. Forget Klopp. Klopp doesn't, I mean, he would see him at the club, etc., but he doesn't interface with him much. He's not allowed to talk to players directly. His team is not allowed to go to players directly, right? What their job is to pass on the data to coaches, and the coaches decide what data is then filtered through to the players based on the context. Data without context is nothing, right? So based on the context that is relevant to that player. On the same panel was the head of analytics for the Houston Rockets, I forget his name, who was saying that he used to ride the bus. He used to be there on the bus for the team, on the flights for the team. So any player, whoever wanted, not all of them do, but whoever wanted to go sit and chat with the analytics guy, they could do it directly. So past the coaches, past everyone, just go sit down with the analytics guy and see when I pick up the ball in the left block, or I'm shooting over my left shoulder, like what is my conversion rate versus my right shoulder, stuff like that, you know. So he can go into whatever level of detail he wants. So again, it's bespoke to the team. Some teams might embrace it in a deeper way. Other teams would say no. And I think that all stems from a managerial style. We saw this many years ago. Like Sam Allardyce was the first guy to talk about analytics in the Premier League, and a lot of other coaches like Harry Redknapp apparently didn't know what a touchscreen was till he actually had an Apple product. So you have managers on either end of the spectrum, and they define that culture. Just to bring this home a bit, I think football is a strange sport in the sense that this significant event is so rare compared to any other sport, right? So analytics will always inherently be skewed, which is why expected goals came up as a measure to just try to bump up this rare event. And there are teams and teams of people who look at it, but the average fan now is getting more educated because these kind of numbers are being used. Like Sky Sports talks about expected goals. Like a lot of the broadcasters will do that. So it's coming into the lexicon of the average fan. Does it take away from it? I don't know. As a purist, you might.
It's just another thing that pisses me off when I see at the end of the game that Bayern Munich lost like 1-0, but they had like an 8-goal expected goal. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, but
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, analytics.
Yeah, but exactly. It's just another thing for you to justify that argument when you're down at the pub with your boys and say, hey, we lost 1-0, but they were the better team. What do you mean?
Yeah, dude.
No, they
had 8 expected goals, bro.
Exactly.
We basically won 9-1.
I mean, the thing that I would really like to see, I think it was like 3, maybe 4 years ago, there was like Daryl Morey at Sloan Conference.
Okay.
And Daryl Morey, of course, one of the analytics gurus in the NBA, and one of the first ones to really have run the Houston Rockets back when he was the Houston Rockets GM in a very analytics focused style, and he talked about football, so soccer analytics for Euron, and he said, look, there is so much wrong in football analytics. For instance, there is so much focus, back then at least, on possession, but possession doesn't score goals. So why should you focus this much on possession, for instance? And he had like a lot of beef with the state of football analytics back then. And so I would, back then he said, like, I guess more jokingly than really, he would probably after the Rockets job do something around football. That would be interesting to him. As we can see now, he didn't, but that would be exciting to me.
Actually, Daryl Morey does own a football club now. He floated. We'll go again back to Web3. Wagner United. I don't know if you.
Okay.
WAG Wagner, which is of course Web3 parlance. Wagner United bought a DAO, which bought a club, and Wagner United was headed by Daryl Morey, Gary Vaynerchuk, and a couple of other celebrities, and they bought over, I think it's Colchester FC in the Premier League. So yeah, he eventually did come into football. He's there.
A natural progression, right?
Something like.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so. So okay,
Crawley Town. Sorry, is the team that they bought. Yeah.
Okay, so cool. we were about to get into a big important sports tech development / trend. Your floor.
Okay, it's just another one. Okay, I mean, there are a couple that I can talk about, and I'll try to do them briefly. We touched upon this a little bit, the advent of VC money, and there's more money coming into the game. And as teams are being bought over by VC funds, you're seeing a lot of Italian teams. It'll never happen in Germany. The 50+1 rule prevents that from happening. We're seeing the Americanization. Ron, you used that phrase earlier. The Super League, for example, was backed by, I think it was JP Morgan or something.
JP Morgan, yeah.
$2 billion.
The Kroenke, I think the Kroenke family was in on that.
But it was these as private money, basically, which was funding these greedy ambitions of the football teams, which a lot of them had American owners. So it comes full circle, especially the Premier League ones. So we're seeing that.
Well, I wonder if it's more or less greedy than UEFA and FIFA and all the old school football. So there is an argument to be had, at least.
True. I mean, in terms of the governing bodies, UEFA and FIFA, I don't think there are, across sport, you'd be hard to find more corrupt governing bodies. So them aside, but at least, like if you go back, I mean, there's always been money coming into football. I always use the Premier League as an example. But in 1992 or 93, Jack Walker, when he took Blackburn to a Premier League title, and this is a small team like Blackburn, this is Walker's millions, right? But Jack Walker, when he was a local guy who made money, was successful in his career, bought his local club, pumped in a lot of money, bought Alan Shearer, bought Chris Sutton, bought a good team, but did that with not really the expectation of making multiples of money out of the sport. He was a rich guy who loved sport, and it was like his little play toy, so he played with it a bit. And they won, which was great. Cut to Roman Abramovich many years later, where you kind of had a similar feeling, but this was just a bit of a plaything, and this is a bit of money that he has, and he's messing around. Of course, Roman is much smarter than And then he first thought he was, because he took that $1.5 billion that he's put in, and current sentiment aside, he would have made a profit of $2 or $3 billion on that initial investment. But now it seems to be changing, because not just in football, we can talk about this in sports. CVC Capital, for example, invested in the All Blacks, New Zealand All Blacks, right? So that's private capital coming into the national team. This is not like the Premier League is still a private run body. The New Zealand rugby is being invested into by CVC Capital, right? FIBA, which is the International Basketball Association, also had CVC Capital put money there. Silver Lake put money into Manchester City. And there are tons and tons of more examples. Elliott Capital.
So what's your explanation? Why is all this big, even institutional money, or at least bigger private equity funds seeking out sports? I mean, I have my theory, but I'm curious to learn yours.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing is self-evident, which is that they believe these assets are undervalued, right? And a VC is only coming in to make multiples of money on the money that they invest, right? They're not doing it because they want their local team to go win a title. No, they're doing it because they have X amount that they invest now. Within a 3, 5, 7 year cycle, or whatever the fund cycle is, they want that return. So they believe any investment, whether it's a startup, whether it's a team, whatever it is, they believe that has the potential to return them that multiple on capital. So they believe that these assets have tremendous upside. That's number one. Number two, I think they believe that European and other sporting assets are much cheaper than what they would do in the US, right? I mean, US across the leagues, I mean, the amount that I think was 300 million or something, that was the valuation for FIBA. This is international basketball, is valued at 300 million or something. And that seems like a joke when you think about what US individual franchises, even the shittiest franchise, I don't know, take the Charlotte Hornets or something, are worth $1 billion, $1.5 billion, right? So they believe these European and other foreign sports assets are undervalued. They think the upside is strong, and they have a blueprint for how they think they can extract money. A great example is Liberty Media and what they did with Formula One. Private money came into a dying sport and has revived it, and how? So if they get the execution right, I think there is money to be made. Sports followings are only increasing; they're not going any other way.
But that was a good segue, because I think, like, I mean, the question is, why do they think sports entities are usually or very often undervalued? And I think you need to take a macro perspective on this topic and see the role that sports currently plays in what I once called the attention economy. And I mean, I didn't invent the term, but I had a publication using this term, because that is really where sports is so interesting from today's macro, let's call it media landscape or attention landscape, because it is one of the key challenges, not only for media companies and brands to get the people's attention, but also for basically every company out there. Any advertiser needs to compete in this increasingly fragmented world of attention and shorter attention spans, and you compete with Instagram, and there is no such thing as like we have 5 TV programs, and that is like a communal event. Everybody watches the same, right? And sports promises to do this up to a certain extent, and even if my personal belief is like these super the time of super big reach is over. Even in sports, we will see more fragmentation, because there is the zone and you can get super deep into darts or so on, because it's always on, and you can follow these sports that used to be much more niche. But then they are super captivating, right? Like probably it's less people overall, but they have these strong relationships and to two people, and these strong relationships are definitely more valuable than ever, because it is the way how you can then sell stuff to advertisers, how you can sell directly to consumer, and so on and so forth. And this would be my theory on a macro level, why so much money is seeking out sports, and then let's see who are the winners of tomorrow. whether
I think
it's
just
FIBA or
just quickly piggybacking off that, Thomas, another pretty big element to it is that, I mean, Gen Z and like the younger generations, they tend to only want to buy products or trust brands that influencers push, right? And that includes athletes. You know, a lot of younger fans are following athletes rather than teams. There's no like franchise loyalty anymore for a lot of like the younger generations. So I think because these brands and advertisers know this, there's like an incentive to get into sports because, you know, athletes represent some of the most, I mean, when you were young, who were like your heroes? For me, it was athletes. It was Kobe Bryant, you know, it was LeBron James. Like those were the guys, like the Ronaldos, the Messis. And I think like, yeah, it that's what speaks to these younger generations, and it makes sense, you know, why a lot of money is flowing that way.
Yeah, can't argue with anything that you guys say. Completely agree. I'll add 2 points to that. One is that, and this has been true for a while. Again, no new thought from my side, but sports has become the last passion of predictable viewing, because sports is almost the last thing that people will tune in live to watch. Nobody watches any sort of content
True.
on
Very true.
and YouTube Live and things like that exist, but not at this scale, right? That's number one. Number two, the fanaticism that sports brings in terms of the following that it has. There are very, very few products. And if you think of sports as a product, there are very, very few products where no matter how shitty it is, no matter how badly it's executed, no matter what, like the user or the fan, consumer will not go anywhere. They are locked in for life, right? And so the LTV of that, again, I hate to think of fans as consumer because I'm a sports fan. We all are. But these are the metrics. So you think about what you can get out of converting one sports fan onto your team or onto your sport. You've got them for life. Not just them, their kids, their grandkids. Like they will find different ways to create touch points, right? So private money is understanding this now. Until 10 years ago, certainly European sports, maybe American sports was faster, but European sports was a mom and pop shop, like a lot of the time. Italian football went into ruin because it was mom and pop shops and private money running it, right? Families running it, basically. But that's changing now. With that comes a lot of good. Of course, that teams get more professional. There are better careers. Sports traditionally has not been a good paying career. That's changing now. It attracts better talent. The product gets better. The on-field effects get better. There's so much more money coming in. The bad side is that as a fan, you're getting squeezed for every dollar, every euro that you're willing to spend. But again, and those are the kind of opportunities, and there are different ways to do it. But again, Web3 offers opportunities to create tiers in that fandom, because earlier that, all the fans can buy a ticket to the game. All right, you can get into the game. Then you created corporate boxes and stuff. Okay, the richer fans can go sit there, but everybody else sits here, with maybe a small difference in price depending on where you're sitting. But now you can add in between lists. Hey, you can't afford a corporate box which costs 2,000 euros, but you can pay more than 100 euros for a seat. So, pre-match, spend 500 euros, go to the players' lounge, hang out, grab a drink. And okay, so it was creating tiers already. Now there are more ways and more tiers that you can create more individual experiences, personalized, et cetera. And that's where this is going, clearly.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, that's a great segue to finally talk a bit of Web3 NFTs, and I think with this tiering and a tool to create more segmentation in your fan base, definitely one interesting subpoint. But before we go a bit deeper on this one, what is like your 2022? It's the end of June take on the space and how it has been used in the sports industry to this day.
I think putting a timestamp on it is very important, because how dynamic the whole thing is. Look, I mean, right from the beginning, I'm not a big NFT owner. I've never been a big collectibles guy. So I wasn't huge to jump on the hype wagon, and I wasn't going crazy on Top Shop, NBA Top Shop when it first launched. But I immediately saw the use case. And I think that's real. I mean, just for example, the first use case was just purely digital collectibles, right? That was it. It was just very simple, whether it's 2D images or 3D video, call it whatever. But I own this piece. I own this moment in history, and that was the first use case. Now we're seeing other more ancillary use cases. So Rare took it to fantasy with, it seems like, middling success. They've had tokens, which we can talk about, and I think that's a poison. I think that the token economy, especially what the team tokens that have been created with Sorcerer specifically, I don't mind saying them, but I think that's really dangerous because it entices an average fan to buy with sentiment, but not participate in any of the speculation because that's out of their control. Like the gaming of these tokens is happening, it's got nothing to do with what the teams are actually doing. So I think that's dangerous. So we'll leave tokens out of it. Then you talk about other applications. Like I said, I think NFTs was just the first use case. I think there are more intelligent use cases to come. Like we saw the Australian Open. I thought that was one of the best uses of NFTs to create kind of engagement. For anybody who doesn't know, the Australian Open did launch a program called Art Ball, A-R-T, Art Ball. So they had these, I think it's 6,776 if I remember correctly, but they basically divided a tennis court into basically the size of a ball, right? So tennis courts lined up with grids, which are balls. And there are, 11 championship finals. So there's men's final, women's final, men's doubles, women's doubles, mixed singles, some junior categories, whatever, there are 11. So there are 6,776 balls that are launched as NFTs you can buy and bid for. If your ball becomes the match winning point on any of those championship games, obviously maybe the men's and women's finals are more important than the junior finals or mixed doubles final. But if you own that NFT, then you get all sorts of great access. You come into the Open. So you've got a moment in history. So you saw, like, I own the NFT for which Rafa Nadal won, his, I think whatever it was, 20th Australian Open or something, and so it creates good engagement, right? We've seen good use cases like that. We've seen play to earn, move to earn, like Step In, which was again NFT based movement application, which got a lot of notoriety because their token increased in value. So you earn while moving. And there's a sports metaverse. So we can go on and on, but we've seen interesting applications of it already. But I think we're super, super early in what Web3 can do, because at the core of it, the functionalities are really interesting. Smart contracts, I think, is a big one, is the biggest one. Decentralized apps, etc. Yeah, we can keep going, but I think NFTs is a wave that we might be a little bit past now.
I definitely have to agree on the point that we are super early. I guess I have to push back on the token point a bit. Not maybe so because I'm in a bit of a complicated position, and I don't want to talk about at least perceived competitors. So let's not talk about the specific company you mentioned, but just in general, I do believe there are ways to use tokens as a cool tool for fan-friendly stuff, and there are other ways. I mean, you mentioned earlier DAO, and there are different concepts of DAOs, right? There are like these highly financialized DAOs who just put money together in a pot to buy some asset, like for instance a sports team or whatever, some books or whatnot, and you have this type of DAO, but you also have like this idea of social DAOs and more community-run things, which I guess is quite compatible with the sports world, and that is why I think one way to implement tokens, and you see this in the broader blockchain crypto world, DAO world, is to say, okay, that is like a little thing that maybe cannot even be acquired. Usually it can be acquired, but maybe it can only be earned for contributions in a given network, and then it gives you influence over the network. It gives you reputation. It's like a way to quantify reputation in a network. And if you take this theoretical wording down to what could this mean in sports is like, again, you talked about building these tiers in fandom, and yes, you can build them by selling more expensive NFTs to individual fans, and then they get more access. But another way, and maybe to balance this, because that is very monetarily driven, is to say, okay, you create models and constructs where your fans for their contributions, for their activities in like the digital and or the analog world can earn stuff that they can then use to get exclusive access to maybe have more of a say. I mean, it's like in traditional organizations, right? If you have more shares, you have more of a say over this, and the shares, for instance, can be earned by belonging to the organization for a long time. It's one way to do so. So
yeah,
that would be my pushback on this.
Yeah, no,
but we are early.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Sorry, I didn't mean to use the same brush to paint all token creators. I think there is a lot of value in that economy, and I think it, as you rightly said, it can be participative, it can encourage inclusion, etc. But using tokens as a financial tool and make that more speculative to get fans to buy in, I think that use case has been exposed in a few different ways.
Yeah, and I think what the starting point for all of this needs to be is like what is great for fans. What do fans actually want to do, right? Because nothing can be done, and that is like to me in the history of not necessarily sports tech at large, but at least like rights holders venturing out into tech projects, into digital projects. You see, I believe, a pretty high failure rate because they are not the user experience designers by default, even though to succeed in the digital attention economy, to bring back this term, they would have to be this, and some are much better than others, right? Yep. Some leagues, some teams really succeed at that, and I guess the best sports brands of tomorrow, or at least of in 10, 15 years, they will be the ones who today understand how to build experiences that are really good for fans. And then the entire Web3 stuff is an interesting instrument to build these better fan experiences, these more engaging fan experiences.
It goes back to that gamification topic, right? It's like how can sports teams and sports brands garner the interest and the engagement of their fans outside of just when the teams are playing? Like, how do we keep their attention on a 24-hour life? Because at the end of the day, isn't that what every brand wants to do? Isn't that what TikTok wants to do? Facebook, Instagram? It's like, how do we keep our users paying attention for as long as possible? And I think that's what kind of tokens can help do. It's like this gamified way where fans can like interact with the brand on a different level outside of the sport. And yeah, I mean, of course, I tend to agree with both you guys. So
yeah, I think to create, as you said, different forms of engagement, which are not just connected to the live event, that's one of the many holy grails in sport. And I think these are good ways to do that. I mean, I think the idea of involving the fans. So there are a few different ways I can speak to. For example, there is an entire league which is formed of this using American football. The Fan Control Football League has got a lot of press. They're in their third season. We had them on our podcast earlier this year, and which is just that, like allowing fans to call plays, right? So not just using fans to vote on the third jersey of the team or to what song plays when the team walks out on the field, which is, yeah, sure, that's a little fun stuff and it creates a bit of engagement and stuff, but it's
too trivial.
Yeah, it's just fluff, right? It's just fluff.
Yeah.
But no, maybe you can use your tokens to actually say that, hey, this is the play that this is what we have to call, this is who in the context of football. And by the way, I still call it football. No, soccer is not my thing. I'm not American, but
I call it football now too, man. I've been here for now 4 years.
no, Thomas
It's football.
told me out earlier. I was like,
oh no, that was not Rohn. That was Ron. Because Ron is the US guy here.
Got it. Maybe I misheard.
But yeah,
he likes to take little digs at my.
That's what makes a good podcast, man. But again, so allow fans to make more. So in the context of football, who's our set piece taker, blah, blah, blah. Now, are you really going to start allowing fans to vote on that in a league game or in the Bundesliga and a DFB Pokal final? No, probably
ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, ain't gonna happen.
But Rohn,
I mean, there are formats that you can. Say on a
I have a handful of friends, maybe 10 guys who all think they know exactly what play to call in exactly every situation. And this is the best way to call those bluffs.
Yeah.
Someone to put their money where their mouth is. And
not just that.
Let's see if it.
Not just that. Actually, the same as you guys, I'm sure. So I have a couple of. So there's the inner group of my boys who are fans of different clubs, and some of us are. I'm a Man United fan, so it's been a great time for me. And there's a wider group of United fans that I'm a part of, right, on WhatsApp or on other channels, and the kind of shit that these guys talk, it's retarded.
From their couch, eating potato chips, like, drinking beer.
Dude, I mean, it makes beyond no sense. It's like what? Like you literally contradict. Like last week, you were shitting on that player. Like said he's the worst thing ever. And this week, because he's
pure class.
He scored a freak goal because the ball came off his ass and went in. Now he's man, he's a legend. And
pure class.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you get all of these kind of fans. So I was having that chat with the CEO of FCFL. Like, how do you qualify? And maybe tokens and the ability to earn tokens and like how do you acquire this knowledge? How do you qualify yourself as a learned fan? And these are ways like you go through some classes or go through some quizzes or go through some courses. I don't know, whatever. Because it's very hard to believe that a fan sitting at home who has a different job and doing something else in their career spends maybe 4 hours of sport in a week, maybe 10 hours, whatever you want, versus somebody who's doing this full time for the last 20 years, has won trophies, has won medals. But no, I think I know more than come on. Like that's
I think
because he played FIFA
there are different areas where that makes more sense. I mean, unless you would be privy to all the same kind of information, right? The coach is also with the players all day long with the team, so there is practical stuff that you just cannot scale. I mean, probably you could follow players 24/7 with video cameras, and that would be, I mean, GDPR. Let's not talk about this angle, but so there would be ways to do this. As I know that you have to run soon, I would just get to the final question, which to me is maybe we are opening another can of worms, but then at least it's by your own doing. So, I mean, you follow the SportsTech market super closely since a long time, and I wonder if you would be starting something right now in this realm, what would it be? Where would you put, what would you find so interesting that you would say this is it or would be it?
Man, that's a great question. I haven't thought about that in a while. Actually, the funny thing is, I mean, I'm not trying to buy time, but the funny thing is that was the intention with which we started doing SportsTechX. At least for me, it was like, hey, doing market research is the best way to study the market to, at some point in time,
enter it.
Yeah, and come up with an application that maybe you can think and scale, etc. Cut to 3-4 years later, we're still doing the research. Not because of anything else, it's just because we found that there was this niche for people who are doing this research, and that had its own value. And so that was the startup that I landed it. But the intention was to answer Thomas's question, which was like, hey, so maybe if I study it deeper, and somebody's, we can manage to get some money along the way and people to pay us. That would be an interesting one. If I had to pick an area, you're putting me on the spot, I will answer the question. I think it has to be Web3 connected. I would pick an area which probably has the most amount of scale and has good applications in Web3 is where probably this conversation started, which would be something along the lines of fantasy or betting in Web3, because I think it ticks a lot of boxes. It creates... It benefits from all the other applications or the nice aspects of Web3, the accountability. Well, accountability is maybe not accurate, but the visibility, the clarity that Web3 gives you, still behind the face of anonymity, but also it gives you transactions which can scale if you have a good product that will execute well, real money. So good products will really find scale quickly in sports betting, and I think there is a global wave to it. If I had to pick one, it's not the I think, but it doesn't sound like the most innovative, but there's a lot of really cool innovation that's happening within the sports betting space, and also the applications within Web3 to take it to esports, to take it to different sports. Yeah, I think that would maybe be the one.
I would have said the same. I would have said the same thing. It's the most direct B2C
that also.
type of thing.
So consumer,
it reaches
scale,
the biggest.
Yeah.
Which sport would you pick then? Because I guess you cannot start with all of them at once.
Well, I think my sport of choice would probably be cricket. Only because, again, A, it's a sport I grew up playing first. It's the first thing I ever played. But B, again, it answers all those questions of scale, etc. If I can understand a market like India, India's unique in a lot of ways, where people are fanatical, but they're also super price sensitive. So how do I break my economics down to be really effective and profitable at very low ARPUs, average revenue per users, and average profit per users, and those kind of metrics? If I can crack that, then to scale up is easy. And to take those metrics and scale them
becomes
down.
a black box.
Yeah. So I think that would be interesting. My sport of choice is still football. It's the one that I most avidly follow. But I think the connections to India would take me back there.
Yeah, and I guess cricket is probably, I don't know, I'm not super familiar with the cricket market. By the way, first guest appearance on the Liquidicast by my son, who just ran in here holding 2 basketballs, actually, small basketballs. So yeah, go grab them. Very interesting choice. And maybe... I don't know if you told it on your podcast, but I was tricking you, because the really last question, of course, is just stealing from you. What's your favorite sports moment?
Okay, we're doing that. That's tough. I have to pick a couple. I have to pick Man United in '99 at the Camp Nou versus Bayern. Of course.
I remember it's so painful.
And funnily enough, for me, I didn't really understand it at the time, because that was my first season of being a United fan. It was just like that. So I just thought the world is always like this, and we just win everything. We just win everything all the time, because they were the first team that was covered on Indian TV. So I picked that, and I have to pick a moment from cricket. Mahendra Singh Dhoni, our Indian cricket team captain, smashing a 6 out of the park, basically like a home run, to win the 2011 World Cup at home in Mumbai. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I'd probably pick those 2.
Cool. Nice. Hey, thank you so much for jumping on the Liquidicast, and looking forward to talking again in the hopefully not too distant future.
Yeah, that was fun, guys. Good chat.
Yeah, thanks, Rohn.